Welcome to the Ebony Role Players podcast. I'm your host, Edye Evans-Hyde, singer, performer, and founder of Ebony Role Players. As a Black theater company in Grand Rapids, Michigan, Ebony Role Players strives to inspire, educate, and engage the cultures of our community. In this podcast, we take a deeper dive into the topics and issues surrounding the stories that we tell. So let's jump right into some meaningful dialogue and celebrate the diverse communities that we share. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Ebony Role Players podcast. I'm Edye Evans-Hyde, your host, and I am so happy to have you here on this. I don't even know what day this is, but I know that this will be shown during Women's History Month because we will be highlighting Women's History Month with our certain guests that we'll be having for the whole month. And today I have a really good friend, Dr. Amy Dunham Strand, and she has been a very good friend of Ebony Role Players and myself for the last few years. So I'm excited to hear what she has to say, and I'm excited to introduce you all to her. But we're going to start off with a quote that, as you know, I like to start off with quotes. And this is from our very wonderful former First Lady, Michelle Obama. The quote says, "Don't ever underestimate the importance you may have because history has shown us that courage can be contagious and hope can take on a life of its own." And I absolutely loved that quote. There's so many wonderful quotes, but I kind of thought that was something that might lead us into a very good conversation. I picked it out because I loved what it says about encouragement and taking our history and understanding our history and understanding that you just need a little encouragement to go in a direction that you want to go in. And right now, I think that especially women need to still have a lot of encouragement and looking at their history and looking at the hope that people had back then to push us forward to being the full people that we aspire to be. So having said that, I would like to introduce a woman who I know has a lot of encouragement for women because of what she does. So Amy, I'm going to thank you for being on our podcast and tell everyone who you are and what you do.
Sure. Well, first, Edye, thank you so much for inviting me to do this. This is the first time I've ever podcasted, so this is new. And when you invited me to do this, I thought, wow, really? With Edye Evans-Hyde, like little old me? Yeah, I'm really glad to join in this adventure with you. And I'm Amy Dunham Strand. I teach and direct the Women's Studies Center, the Jane Hibbard Idema Women's Studies Center here at Aquinas College, which is your alma mater.
My alma mater, yes.
Yeah. And I kind of wear, at small liberal arts colleges, you wear a lot of different hats. And we call this role kind of a facilitator role. So I teach both in the Women's Studies program and in our Gen Ed program. And I direct the Women's Studies minor, and I direct our Women's Studies Center, which does programming on women's and gender issues with the goal of empowering our community to be voices for social justice and social change, and to raise awareness about feminism and feminist issues and gender in our society and around the world. So I wear a few different hats, and I kind of want to go back to the quote, Edye, because this quote is really, it's interesting. Well, first of all, Michelle Obama, right.
What can you say?
She's amazing. Did the quote come from her book, Becoming, I wonder?
It might have, and I thought about that, but I actually just found it online. Yeah. So it may be in her book. That sounds like,
I don't know.
Perfect for it. Yep.
If you haven't listened to her book or read it, it's just so great. And And, we're talking about Women's History Month starting, like the fact that we have Michelle Obama's perspective on the presidency, right? That's women's history, right? They're so important that we have Michelle's voice on this incredible period in history. But the quote itself, courage can be contagious and hope can take on a life of its own. I just thought it was so interesting that you chose that, because I was kind of thinking about it before we started the call, and both of those things, courage and hope, are courage comes from heart, the French word for heart, and hope, like these are spiritual gifts, right? And it was interesting because it's quote not about something intellectual or material. It's about an orientation of our spirit. And I thought it was so interesting that you chose that because of what you do, like with Ebony Road Players. It's kind of you're orienting audiences and youth to hear messages in new ways and to be in brave spaces together. And I think it's really similar to like the educational endeavor. Like, I'm an educator and I'm a lifelong learner and I love learning. And so to me, it just speaks to the necessity of education and imagination for cultivating courage and hope. Does that make any sense?
Oh, it absolutely does. And I think that what's important is, and as you can see on my little background, it's education, social justice, and of course with theater, awesome art, and that's the platform in which we do things. But I think when you have Women's History Month or Black History Month or any of these types of months, it's an opportunity to educate. It's an opportunity to encourage those groups, and it's a small, we're just going to have this month and we're going to talk about these different things. But if we didn't have it, I have a feeling we wouldn't take the time to really show it, if that makes sense. And so I know that the reason I'm doing what I am doing is because I have seen people. I kind of love history, even though that's probably what my major should have been, was history. But I love to find out that there were people back in the 50s or even, 1930s. My mom, was born, and then she became a teacher. And this is a woman who probably went through a lot of stuff to get to where she was. But because of that, I was able to see that and didn't think that it was impossible. So it is contagious, if that makes sense, that hope is contagious and you just go out there and do things. So what you're saying, I think, is in line even deeper than what I was, my reflection of that quote, but I just loved it.
It's interesting to think about too, like theater and education, like the classroom, for example, or programming on a campus, as having a role of passing on that hope and maybe passing on that courage, because theater enables us art enables us to imagine different worlds and maybe see different worlds, and hopefully education allows the same thing.
And experience different worlds. And one of the reasons I really love having you on is to kind of give a perspective of what you do, because I don't know if there's a lot of schools that have an actual center for women's studies. I know that there's probably a degree in it, but what are some of the things that you do there at Acquinas, in terms of not only the educational aspect of it, but the center?
Sure. Yeah. I do think we're pretty unique in terms of being such a small liberal arts school and having a women's studies center, which is a co-curricular, like an academic center, a center that helps support the academic program. A lot of larger colleges do have women's centers or women gender sexuality centers, but I think we're kind of unique in being a women's studies center, that offers programming alongside the academic area or the program of women's studies, which itself is relatively, interestingly, like I'll go down a little tangent, it's a relatively young field, right? Like women's studies, now you often hear it as women gender sexuality studies, right? Or women in gender studies, which will be us in a couple years. Like we didn't exist as a field until just my lifetime. The first women's studies program was at, I think, University of San Diego in 1970, right? Wow. So it's a field that's grown up with me, really, you know, and is just a field that explores women's accomplishments here and around the world, women's lives through the lens of gender and theory. And now more and more, I think one of the biggest shifts that has happened in recent years with respect to women's studies is really thinking about intersectionality, which is Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term, which was really theorized before her, Bell Hooks and Sherry Moraga and a lot of other women of color who really, you know, brought our attention to the fact that women isn't a monolithic entity, you know, that we need to be attending to all of the differences. You know, we are who we are, not just because of gender, but because of race and class and sexuality and nationality and a whole host of other things. So that's been a really interesting shift. But in terms of the center, and a really valuable, important shift, I think, in terms of the center and the programming, I think some of the things that we've done to bring attention to women's and gender issues on our campus, you've been involved with. So one of my first events, you know, and probably it's one of my favorite ones really of all time, was when I was brand new in this position. I didn't know what I was doing, but you know, Ebony Road Players brought for Color Girls and Tozaki Shange's amazing feminist, you can't even call it a play because she kind of resisted the form of a play, right? Like it was,
she called it a choreo poem.
Yeah, so talk about it, because talk about what you think was special about that, because I thought it was really special too. Like it was a really great.
Yeah, and we did it even as a reading, which that play, I'm calling it a play, but it really lent well to a reading. It was our very first production, and let me just stop a minute. I had no idea this was like the first thing that you had done.
Well, end of my first year, like it was really in my first, but we started talking about it in the fall, right? Which would have been my first fall, I think, one of the first things. So yeah.
It was our first production at Acquinas, and I remember we thought maybe it was going to be a little scandalous, but it ended up being amazing. And my idea of it, when I looked at how we presented it, was a set of poems, really, a choreographed movement of poems about Black women and about their different things that were happening to them over a time. And I think it's things that actually Ntozake Shange probably experienced a lot in her life. So these were almost poems about herself. And yeah, it's a very popular, we've done it twice now, very popular production. And it was really wonderful to have Acquinas be a part of that. And I will just say that we had talked about it. Like I said, I didn't know your history, but I knew that we were going to work together on it. And all I remember is we both got on stage at the same time and welcomed everyone. And I don't know, but I had a tear in my eye, and I think you did too, about, speaking of intersectionality, the total diversity of that audience. And if I remember right, it was a full house.
Yeah.
And it was, I don't know, tell me what your feelings were, because I was like, oh my gosh, this is what I imagined Ebony Road Players Theater people to look like. And I think that was the first time I had seen it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it was just, I think it was May. I think it was in the spring,
Yes.
right? And I
Yes.
remember being a little nervous because it was like after the academic year had ended, I was like, oh, I hope, people come. And of course, people showed up for Edye Evans Hyde and Ebony Road Players in this amazing play, and it was packed.
Yes.
And it was intergenerational, it was interracial. There were folks from on campus, folks from off campus. Like it was a really wonderful representation of community for this Black feminist writer. Shenge, I think, didn't her play come out? The choreo poem, came out like in the mid 70s, maybe,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
It has really become timeless. And the performance itself, it's 7 women,
Seven women, I think.
Seven women, different colors of the rainbow,
yes,
right, representing the title. And they each tell stories of their lives, and all these different paths. It really just raises up voices of women who have suffered from racism and sexism in our society. And it was written in the 70s, but it's still so pertinent today, and so relevant. And I think, it was a really beautiful performance, because not only because of the audience, but the performance itself. I thought the readers were incredibly talented, and Shenge's words are just
powerful,
timeless yes. and powerful. And then, that was you did that again. Ebony Road Players did that again at Creston, right? Yeah.
Yes, we did it at Creston Brewery.
Right there. Yeah. And I mean, I guess, so programming, so that play is an example of, the kinds of programming to bring attention to women's and gender issues and to women's voices and experiences. We also did with Ebony Road Players, the Delaney sisters play.
Yes.
A couple times, I think, here, Having Our Say, right?
Having Our Say, yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I love that show too.
I love that show. And A Simple Question, right? Which
One Simple Question. Yeah.
One Simple Question. So, some artistic endeavors to bring awareness. We also have speakers. We have a Her Story speaker series in conjunction with our Center for Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity. And we're now in our 5th year of that series. And it's once a month, the Brown Bag series, where people come and tell their stories about coming to positions of leadership on campus or in our community. We have had other, big name speakers. We often collaborate with different organizations and groups on campus. This fall, we had a collaboration with the Contemporary Writers Series to bring Native author Angeline Booley to campus. She wrote the book, The Firekeeper's Daughter, which is about a Native Michigan woman, it's told through the voice of a young Native woman in the Upper Peninsula. It's kind of a thriller. It's being made into like a made-for-TV series, I think, through the Obama's what's it called?
Company.
Yeah, production company. Yeah, thank you. So we do a lot of different events. We'll have a scavenger hunt next week to kick off Women's History Month, to kind of complicate the idea of a key figure in women's history. It's going to be a kind of hidden figures scavenger hunt, because, sort of turning back to this idea of history and women's history, I think, we often have these ideas of historical figures, like single figures, number one, Susan B. Anthony, or Elizabeth Cady Stanton, or, and I think that, students are onto something and wanting to really think about collectives, groups of people who change the world, and thinking about people outside the U.S. who have changed the world. And I mean, I guess this brings us back to the Obama quote too, to Michelle Obama's quote, just in terms of thinking about those who have given hope and courage to change the path of history, why is Women's History Month important? Right? Why is Black History Month important? I was trying to think where I wanted to go with that. And I think just circling back to what you said earlier, that if if we didn't take time to pause and recognize those voices of folks who have been marginalized in the historical record and in practice, then, we could lose it. Arguably, it should be more than a month, right? It should be year round. I know Women's History Month started as a week, right? With in 1980, we were talking about it before we started recording, right? Yeah,
and we can talk about who kind of pushed that forward was President Carter, right? And he's one of these guys, and people are talking about him now because of him going into hospice care. But being a president wasn't something that I think he aspired to. I think when he only had one term, but when he left, I didn't even know that he started Women's the History Week or made it a national type of thing. And I always feel like there are these people, and they don't have to be women, but there are these people who understand that we need to observe these histories. Because right now, and you can tell me what you think about this, right now I feel like there is a amazing pushback that is a little frightening to me, and that we have to work even harder to get young people to understand there is a history of women empowerment. There is a history of Black empowerment. And, don't take President Obama and Michelle Obama as being, this is the end of everything. Because usually there is human beings, in my opinion, tend to like to go back to what is safe, as opposed to pushing forward and embracing everyone having a sense of empowerment. And how is that affecting your teaching when it comes to, it really is a huge pushback, even books and things that schools can't have, and talking about the power of women, and just how does that affect your teaching? How does that affect people on campus, young people on campus? Is there a feeling about any of that?
Yeah, Edye, I really think that I think you're onto something. I think you really name, what I see as pushback, and I think it impacts different people in different ways. I think it makes some more fearful to speak up. I think it makes some bolder to speak up. But to say that we are somehow post-feminist any more than we are post-racist, because we had Michelle and Barack in the White House, is a complete anomaly. I think it's interesting because I think students coming in may take for granted that things have been accomplished for people of color and for women. And yes, maybe there are more visible people in positions of power and leadership positions. Maybe we are seeing gains in women in athletics. Maybe we are beginning to see the gender wage gap start to close, but there's so much work to be done. And the gains that have been made in such a relatively short time, and have, as you said, we've experienced a lot of pushback in that time as well. There's still a persistent wage gap of, I think it's now 83%. I think when I started in this position, it was like 75% women earn 83% now to the dollar for every dollar a man makes, but even less for, women of color, Black women who have experienced because of the history of slavery, and even less for Native women through land theft, right? So the wage gap continues to persist, and even more for some than others. We still have persistent gaps in education, particularly STEM for women and girls. We still see persistent harassment, sexual assault, gender-based violence, 1 in 5 of female undergrads has reported sexual misconduct or assault. And there was a report from the CDC just this last week that a colleague shared on teen girls that shows record levels of violence and sadness and suicide and mental health issues, and particularly so for LGBTQ plus students.
Yeah. And
teens, so it's gone up like 20%. 20% teen girls experiencing sexual violence just between 2017 and 2021. So we're seeing huge and very concerning upticks. Meanwhile, while, there's just a pandemic of violence that's, I think, fueled by toxic masculinity, in recent years, the shootings that we're witnessing, they are overwhelmingly by white boys and men, and so we have made some strides. We now have the vote, right?
Yes, right.
That's like people go, okay, we can vote, but even that was just a little over 100 years ago.
Yes.
Like that was just a little over 100 years ago. But we have so much still to do, I think.
Because yes, and because of that, you look at where women are now. And this is what people are afraid of, the education, and this is just my opinion, but we really just want women to go back and have a bunch of babies and be home and do these types of things that we want them to do, and so the pushback, I think, is even worse right now. In almost all fields. And so what I want to say is I appreciate the work that you do and the work that, having a women's studies program is so important for women to realize that there is more to life than what they hear on the news. I never had a problem, I don't think, with feeling like because I was a woman that I couldn't get what I wanted. I think I'm a little bit older now and probably feel like, yeah, maybe some things I didn't get because I was a woman, and definitely a woman of color, but I still saw people around me who were doing things. So I just kept saying, oh, I just got to get better at what I'm doing and go for it. And I think that's what's important for people my age to really push to young people as well. And this is why the theater, and I think the arts, you addressed this a little bit ago of what you guys are doing. I think theater and arts, different arts programming, when it is specific about social justice, can be very helpful to everyone, and not just women, not just people of color, but to the whole community at large, in understanding where we are and where we need to go.
And give us a space to sort of process some of these things. You're in it, but from a distance as well. Like, you have this very intimate but brave space to process some of the things that are going on in the world. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. In real time with real people, we didn't even mention some of the ways in which, social media has been challenging for social justice, right? And for students, and, so absolutely. Yeah. I think theater and the arts are so important now.
Yeah. And so I appreciate you starting us. Our very first production, and we just got our nonprofit. I want to say that was 2015, I think it was, or 2014, somewhere along in there. And we've been doing it ever since. And I really appreciate you, and I appreciate Acquinas, and appreciate just our being able to talk about things. And I won't keep you because I know that I'm going to have you back. Um, now that you've done it, your first podcast.
First podcast, yeah.
But it's pretty easy and it's fun, and I will definitely have you back on because I think there's such a depth of things to talk about through the next year or so. But I wanted you to be on definitely for Women's History Month.
Oh.
And I appreciate you very much. I want to tell the audience that you'll be able to see this, of course, on your favorite podcast and or podcasting platform, I should say. But we will also be posting this on YouTube if Amy is okay with that. And she can subscribe to it, and you can subscribe to it as an audience. And send us a message of what you thought was inspiring, or if you have questions for me or Amy, or you just want to say, hey, you should have so-and-so on your podcast as well. We are open to all of that. Amy, Dr. Amy Dunham Strand, thank you for being the person that you are. And we really appreciate you. And I will... if you have anything final that you want to say, please go right ahead.
I just want to say thank you. Yeah, just thank you, Edye, for just for inviting me into this space with you. I really do think that you are one of the people who passes on hope, right? Hope can take on a life of its own, and that is what you do for our community and what you've done for me. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I appreciate you very much. And we'll talk again soon. Again, everyone, this is Dr. Amy Dunham Strand, and we're so happy to have had you. And we will talk to all of you again on our next Ebony Role Players podcast. Have a good day. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Ebony Road Players podcast. Creating theater with a purpose is our mission, and that is not possible without people like you. We appreciate you joining us for this podcast and for being a part of our diverse community. To view the video version of this episode and gain access to exclusive Ebony Road Players content and perks, join our community on Patreon at patreon.com/Ebony Road Players. In the words of Zora Neale Hurston, quote, "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you," unquote. If you have a story to share, we'd love to hear from you. Contact us on Facebook, Instagram, or our website, ebonyroad.org. And we look forward to continuing the conversation next time on the Ebony Road Players podcast.